You're listening to dkitalk.com.
So Murphy has now got a surplus. So the next stage is to distribute Murphy's surplus. So we'll try and tease out what happens at that stage. So we'll tease out what happens Murphy's 1,500 votes at the next count. Now, I didn't say earlier on, when we come into further counts, Murphy has two types of paper associated with him at this stage. He has his number ones, and he now has his new papers that he inherited from Bellew. And they actually give him a surplus. And we're now going to distribute his surplus. But from the counting point of view, we only look at the last bundle of papers that Murphy got to elect him. In other words, we're only going to look at the 1,500 papers he got from Bellew. So, earlier on, I didn't actually tell you...
In terms of distributing Murphy's surplus.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, so earlier on, I didn't actually tell you how many first preference votes Murphy got. But maybe at this stage we'll mention how many first preferences he got. Murphy got 6,500 first preferences. And he got 1,500 preferences, number twos from Bellew. And that gave him a total of 8,000 votes.
When the quota was 7,000.
So he's now got a surplus of 1,000. Now, to distribute Murphy's surplus, we only look at the 1,500 votes that he inherited from Bellew. We don't look at the other 6,500. That's just one of the rules of the PR mechanism. We only look at the last bundle of papers that put the candidate over the surplus. So what we're actually going to be doing here now is we're going to be looking at papers that say 1 Bellew, 2 Murphy, and we're now going to be looking at the number threes. Okay, so we'll tease that out. So we're looking at the 1,500 votes, and there's only two candidates left in the race. There's O'Gogan and there's Smith. So we'll try and keep the numbers reasonably simple. So we're now looking at number threes. So O'Gogan gets 900, Smith gets 300, and there's 300 non-transferable. So just to go through those again, O'Gogan gets 900, Smith gets 300, and there's 300 non-transferable. That's your 1,500 votes. 900 and 3,000 for Smith and 3,000 non-transferable. That gives you your total of 1,500 votes. Now, if we look at the ratios, O'Gogan gets 900 votes, Smith gets 3,000 votes. So in simple terms, for every vote Smith gets, O'Gogan gets 3 votes. So there's only 1,000 votes of a surplus. So it's very easy to see how many votes O'Gogan is going to get, how many votes Smith is going to get. So 1 and 3 is 4. So for every 4 votes, Smith's going to
get 3, Smith will get 1.
Exactly. So we divide the 4 into the 1,000 and we get 250. So Smith is going to end up with 250 votes and O'Gogan ends up with 750 votes, reflecting the ratio of 1:3.
Okay.
So all we do is, of those 900 votes that O'Gogan got from Murphy, we're going to actually move 750 of those papers into O'Gogan's pile. And the other ones will have to stay in Murphy's pile because he still needs them for his quota. Likewise with Smith, there was 300 votes that said Murphy number 2, Smith number 3, but Smith's only getting 250 of them. So 250 of them are moved into Smith's pile. Now again, for the purists, if you have your pen and paper, what we actually do is, remember what we said at the second count, we come up with a ratio, we get the surplus and we divide it by the number of transferable papers. Now in this case the surplus was 1,000. Murphy had 8,000 votes, the quota was 7,000, so the surplus was 1,000. And how many votes were transferable? So just to remind you of the numbers, O'Gogan got 900 and Smith got 300. That was 1,200. And there was 300 that weren't transferable.
They disappear.
And they disappear at this stage. So there was 1,200 votes that were transferable. So we come up with this ratio. We get the surplus. We divide it by the number of transferable votes. So it's 1,000 divided by 1,200. And we come up with a ratio this time of 5/6. So remember, O'Gogan got 900 number 3s. So we get those 900, we multiply by 5/6, and we come up with a 750 number. Likewise with Smith, we get the 300, we multiply by the 5/6, and we come up with a 250 number. Now I know that thinking of the mathematics is difficult, but using the simple ratio, for every vote that Smith gets, O'Gogan got 3. It's easier to see how the
So basically we divided 1,000 extra or surplus votes in a 3-to-1 ratio to
Correct.
O'Gogan. 3 to O'Gogan, 1 to Smith, 750 O'Gogan, 250 to Smith.
Correct.
Physically pass these papers over.
But just to explain the mathematical process, if the numbers aren't nice, if the numbers are awkward, then we have to really get the calculators out. So we do have to use this formula, the surplus divided by the transferable. So the surplus was 1,000, and we divided by the transferable, which was 1,200, and we got 5/6. And you get that ratio, and you multiply by the actual number of papers that say O'Gogan, number 3, and we multiply by, in this case,
so
900.
5/6 of 900
exactly,
is 750.
Exactly, right. Yeah. But the listeners will have a feel from the earlier discussion of the 1:3 ratio, how the thing works. But this is just to explain the technicality of how it works. Now, there's one assumption that I didn't mention until now, and the assumption was that the number of transferable papers is more than the surplus. In later counts, that situation might change. In this example here that we just did, the surplus was 1,000 and the number of transferable papers was 1,200. So we did our proportional. We had to select certain papers to move, and we left some papers behind. Now we look at the example of where the reverse situation holds, that the number of transferable papers is less than the surplus. So what we'll do is we'll take exactly the same example and we'll rerun this third count. So to summarise where we're at, we had the first count where Bellew had 10,000 votes, and we distributed his votes, and Murphy got 1,500, and so on. So we're going to replay that example again, only we're going to change what happens in the third count, just as another example of how the process works. Okay? So, the quota was 7,000. Bellew got 10,000 votes. His surplus was 3,000. They were distributed, as we said earlier on, and we're not going to go through those numbers again. And Murphy got half that surplus, so he got his 1,500 votes. And just like the previous example, Murphy was then elected. And you remember we said that Murphy had a total of 8,000 votes.
So he had 1,000 surplus.
He had 1,000 of a surplus. And we're now going to look at the distributing of the 1,500 votes and what happens. Now we're going to make the numbers a bit different this time, just to demonstrate this second possibility. So this time we look at the number 3s on Murphy's papers. So again, they say 1 Bellew, 2 Murphy, and now we're looking at the number 3s. Now this time there was quite a number that weren't transferable. We're still talking about the 1,500 votes. This time there was 900 non-transferable. O'Gogan gets 500 and Smith gets 100. So if we add those up, they come up to 1,500. Now the non-transferable ones don't come into the situation.
Just again to recap for the listener,
Yeah.
non-transferable ones in this situation could typically be somebody who had voted Bellew 1, Murphy 2 and didn't go any further.
Right? That's exactly
so now
it.
of those 1,500 votes that came to Murphy from Bellew,
correct,
of which we're going to put 1,000 of them on to the next guys because they're the spare ones.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, there's only 600 of that 1,500 still in play.
Exactly.
But the proportionality of it is now that O'Gogan is going to get 5/6 of those.
No, this is why this example is different.
Right.
This example is different.
Well, let's just, what we did find is of the 600 that were valid,
yes,
500 of those were for O'Gogan and 100 were for Smith. So now we know how to divide these.
Well, actually, the good news for the listener is we don't actually do anything. All we do is we actually get those 500 papers and we put them beside O'Gogan's name, and we get the 100 papers for Smith and we put them beside Smith's name. But now the interesting thing about this example is there was a surplus of 1,000, but we've actually only got value for 600. So we're actually losing some value of that surplus. So there's actually 4,000 votes, and there's an expression used, it's non-transferable effective. So in this situation, the 1,000 and the surplus didn't actually materialise in its totality to benefit the candidates. And that was because there was too many papers non-transferable. So the proportional thing didn't kick in that situation. So just to recap that again, if the surplus is less than the number of transferable papers, then the proportional kicks in. But if it's the other way around, if the surplus is more than the number of transferable papers, then we only have a few papers to work with, and they will just move to the candidate, and the proportion thing doesn't really kick in, and we actually end up losing some value of the surplus.
Now, apart from the fact that my head's done in with the figures, Seamus,
yes.
I mean, and we have chosen numbers here in this example, which are relatively easy to follow if you write them down in pencil and paper. We've deliberately done that.
Yeah.
And also, in a typical constituency, you could have 100,000 votes. It's not 2,000 or 4,000. A large number of votes.
Yes.
And also, people are physically moving these around.
And the numbers are awkward. You might have 13,496 votes for some candidates.
Now, just to clarify, are there further layers beyond this now?
No, that pretty much sort of summarises the two main aspects of PR. I mean, the two main aspects of PR are if a candidate is eliminated, and we discussed that, they go on to the further preference. If a candidate gets a surplus, we start looking at number twos, and we discussed what happens to those.
Well, what we do there is we count all of the number twos.
Count all of the number twos.
And then we find out what their level of proportionality is, and then we apply that level of proportionality to actually the number that we want to transfer for.
Correct. That's right.
And then finally, there are situations where, as you get down the count range...
As we get down the count range, another candidate might get a surplus at a later stage, and we only look at that more recent bundle of papers that gave the surplus, and we start dividing those up in a proportional sense. Now, there are two situations in that case. One of the situations is where the number of transferable papers in that bundle is more than the surplus, in which case we go through the sums and divide in a proportional sense. The other situation is if in that bundle of papers the number of transferable votes is less than the surplus, then we don't have to actually do the transferable proportional bit, we just actually move the transferable papers to the candidate.
Yeah, just a question I had, let me jump into the situation, the example you had with Murphy. The figures I understood were Murphy originally got 6,500 of his own number ones.
Correct.
He then picked up 1,500 being transferred to him from Bellew.
Correct.
Which now brought him to 8,000, even though he only needed 7,000.
That's right.
So now what we're going to do is pass on Murphy's excess or surplus.
Correct.
But in fact, all we can look at is the most recent 1,500 he got from Bellew. What fascinates me there is if Murphy's following, the people who gave him number twos, or number ones, were specifically interested in somebody for a number two, in fact, that gets clouded because the only thing that gets transferred from Murphy's surplus is what came through from Bellew.
Correct.
Now, just go back to when we got in originally into this conversation. This is to recap something we said earlier. My interest in this complexity is, I'm just saying, I wonder... Firstly, it's interesting to see how people will be able to follow this, listening to it in an audio medium. I think it can help because you can play it back and write it out. And then the other thing is, we've got a supposed conversation in Ireland about the difficulty people have with mathematics. And the thing is that supposedly politics are for ordinary people and you don't have to have PhDs in mathematics to do a count. And we have to have trust in the system. And of course, the big question that's coming up is the whole idea of computerization. And I had said to you before, leaving aside concerns about whether computers can be hacked and whether people tell lies or all the rest, all my sense all the time is that if I went in, two things, if I go into a machine and I press 1, 2, 3, 4 and it goes into the computer, two things happen. The computer does all the number crunching itself, and basically whatever you put in, you get the right answer. I mean, we trust that computers work our bank accounts, so we obviously believe in computers to that degree.
You've been listening to dkitalk.com.